Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Our today's discussion is about the most famous and most popular thinker, leader, politician, and name of that personality is Nikolai Lenin. Period of Lenin was April 9th, 1870 to 21st January 1924. When we discuss about communist revolution in Soviet Union or about change of government in Soviet Union, then discussing about revolution and to the establishment of an official government, in all process no one played a more important role than Nikolai Lenin. At that period there was a party, Social Democratic Party. Social Democratic Party splitted into two wings, Bolshevik and Menshevik. The term Bolshevik means majority. The term Menshevik means minority. So Nikolai Lenin was active leader and member of Bolshevik, and he played his very important role through his dynamic leadership, and he tried his best for the change in the country. During this discussion, one point is very important, and that is, for one thing is very clear, that the circumstances were favorable. The country was ripe for revolution, and the Bolsheviks were on the scene at the right time with the correct strategy under the leadership of Lenin. Moreover, their competitors were less ably led and were incapable of presenting a united front against the Bolsheviks, whose ability, dedication, ruthlessness, they tragically played their important role. During these circumstances, Lenin's contributions to the cause of Marxism had, until a revolution, been very essentially, and Lenin played his role with great contributions to Marxism. As a revolutionary leader, as a revolutionary strategist, as a politician, as a statesman, he demonstrated qualities of greatness despite possible criticism of the ends to which his abilities were directed. But it was Lenin, more than any other, who established the base for which it could function, and if the ideological foundation of the Soviet policy is Marxist, another point which has been questioned, it is a Marxism shaped by Leninist interpretations. Lenin practiced law for a short time, but he had no real interest in this profession for which he had been trained. In 1894, he returned to St. Petersburg, where he began to write revolutionary pamphlets and to attack those who were, in his opinion, preventing Marxism doctrines by diluting their revolutionary principles. So, Leyland, the following year, 1895, Leyland took a trip abroad to meet different other leaders and personalities of that period and other revolutionaries who lived in exile from their native Russia. Lenin organized a revolutionary group known as the Union for the Liberation of the Working Class. This point is very important in this discussion because Lenin, this contribution remained very important. Formation for a union for the liberation of working class. In December of 1895, he was arrested by Tsar police, tried and found guilty of revolutionary activities and sentenced to prison for a term of 1 year. He remained in touch with revolutionary leaders, revolutionary peoples, and during this period he thought about some revolutionary writings, and during this period he rose to a position of leadership among the social democrats, although his radical approach to problems alienated many of the more moderate party elements. Lenin and the Bolsheviks insisted upon a small, compact, militant, and disciplined party allied with the more revolutionary elements of the peasantry. They rejected any strategy which minimized the revolutionary party goals. So, overall, Lenin became successful when the Russian Revolution began in 1917. Lenin went to Russia where he assumed leadership of Bolsheviks. In October, the Soviets overthrew the provisional government and Lenin became head of the new government. He made peace with Germany, although at the cost of a great deal of Russian territory, put down a counter-revolution, frustrated attempts of the Allies at intervention, and launched the new economic policy, a temporary concession to private enterprise which gave him time to consolidate his regime. Lenin demonstrated ability as a statesman and administrator in establishing a revolutionary government and setting it on its initial course. Overall, Lenin remained a most famous leader, famous writer, famous statesman, famous administrator in the history of Russia. Now I explain you briefly about Lenin's writings and his contributions. Number 1. Development of capitalism in Russia. Number 2, what is to be done? Number 3, two tactics of the social democracy in democratic revolution. Next, materialism and empiro-criticism. Next, imperialism, the final stage of capitalism. Next, state and revolution. And next most important his writing was thesis and report on bourgeoisie in democracy and dictatorship of proletariat. All these were his famous writings in which he clearly explained his philosophy, his views for a successful revolution, and also he mentioned different changes in the Marxism, and he introduced different aspects of Marxism in Leninism. After a brief introduction of Lenin's life history and his writings, I explain you about the different theories and different aspects of his contributions. His most important concept was the professional revolutionary. The most important contribution of Lenin to Marxism is his doctrine of the professional revolutionary. Lenin draws a distinction between an organization of workers, which is essentially trade union in character, extensive and public, with an organization of revolutionary, which is restricted and secret. Unlike Marx, Lenin did not believe in the working classes developing their class consciousness slowly by their own efforts and experience. Political consciousness can be brought to the workers only from without, that is, only outside of the economic struggle, outside of the sphere of relations between workers and employers. Lenin, more than Marx, put emphasis on the revolutionary rather than evolutionary aspect of communism and had faith only in revolutionary method. In this discussion, this point is very, very important. I repeat it again, that Lenin more often Marx put emphasis on the revolutionary rather than evolutionary. So his emphasis was about revolutionary methods in a very clear way. He applied Marxism philosophy to the conditions of Russia, where there was little of organized working class with the class consciousness. This consciousness was to be brought about by professional revolutionaries. The insistence of Lenin on the professional revolutionary and the revolutionary function of the intellectual goals against the Marxian thesis that revolution results not from ideas but from material conditions of production. Next most important point regarding this discussion is that Lenin also is a firm believer in minority leadership. So, Lenin highlighted concept of minority leadership. If a small minority of professional revolutionaries was necessary to win power for the proletariat, minority leadership was still needed after the dictatorship of the proletariat had been established. The majority of the workers would acquire proletarian ideology only under the guidance and leadership of its communist vanguard. The, the communist minority had the right to lead and rule because it represented the general will of the proletariat. Lenin realizes that the communists may not be able to win power by open methods. He therefore advises them to form cells in all political, industrial, military, cooperative, educational, and athletic associations. These cells may be open or secret depending on the circumstances. There should be a centralized supervision, guidance, and control of the communist cells. The communists should combine legal with illegal work and organization. They must use all possible strategic and tactical means to attain their revolutionary seizure of power. The organizational principles of Lenin were, most importantly, secrecy, minority leadership, centralized authority, and use of force and illegal means. As I have earlier explained you that Lenin was a follower of Karl Marx and was critical of revisionism of the Karl Marx theories according to his circumstances at that period. He was, however, compelled by circumstances to interpret Marxism in such a way as to merit the characterization of his own breed of Marxism as inverted Marxism. Lenin formulates remained the formulas of Marx. The meaning of Leninism can be explained that interpretation in Marxism. So Lenin's assertion that revolution could be and should be by professional revolutionaries was against the Karl Marx views about dialectical process. Lenin's emphasis on the potency of revolution ideas and ideology went counter to Marx, with whom ideas merely reflected but did not create material conditions. So, Lenin differed from Marx in his conception of the dictatorship of proletariat. To Lenin, this meant the dictatorship of the Communist Party over the proletariat. To Marx, it had meant ruled by the proletariat majority and not by a Communist Party minority. So, Marxian democracy is supposed to conserve and extend all the political and civil liberties of the democratic republic became in the hands of Lenin the dictatorship violent and repressive of the Communist Party. I explain you about professional revolutionary. The concept of professional revolutionaries was a great and major contribution of Lenin in Marxism, because Lenin thought that without professional revolution is not possible. Now I explain you Leland's next most important views about imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism. Imperialism as a highest stage of capitalism. Leland regards imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism. As capitalism develops, units of industrial production grow wider and bigger and combine interests to produce monopoly of capitalism. The same process takes place in the financial world. Banks combine and become masters of capital that industrialists use, so that monopoly capitalism is also finance capitalism. Monopoly finance capitalism is aggressively expansionist. Its expansionist tendency leads to three consequences: exploitation of colonial people, promotion of international wars between capitalist countries, and the ultimate collapse of capitalism. In fact, the transition from capitalism to socialism is through imperialism. According to Lenin, imperialism is highest form of capitalism containing number of contradictions which ultimately destroy capitalism. Lenin also explained that contradiction between capital and labor. Capital exploits labor and brings the exploited workers to revolution. And he further explained that there is also the contradiction between the colonial powers and the dependent colonial peoples, which arouses revolutionary outlook and spirit among the latter, as happened in different parts of the world. So, imperialism creates conditions favorable to the destruction of capitalism by promoting class and international conflicts and revolutionary outlook among proletariat. After examining imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism, I explained you about proletarian concept of proletarian revolution. Marx had explained that if a worker movement is not revolutionary, it is nothing. But Marx had not explained details about this theory or any clear techniques of revolution. This deficiency of Marx was made clear by Lenin. Lenin faced with a certain situation in Russia, particularly in 1917 and after. As a practical revolutionary, He could not afford to let capitalism move into socialism by slow evolutionary dialectical process. The situation in Russia could not be exploited in favor of socialism unless the slow evolution of dialectics could be replaced by revolution and the transition of socialism can be hastened. Lenin applied himself to the formulation of the theory and tactics of the proletarian revolution in general, the theory and tactics of dictatorship of the proletariat in particular. So, to wait for the worker becoming the majority party and establishing socialism as an illusion, besides, the history of all previous revolutions clearly indicated that more organized, more class conscious, better armed minority forces its will upon the majority. Lenin saw that a coalition between the proletariat revolution in Europe and the colonial revolution in the East in a united world front of revolution against the world front of imperialism is inevitable. This pointed to the necessity of the development of revolutionary techniques and revolutionary atmosphere. Lenin pointed out that Marx's reference to the withering away of the state referred to the remains of the proletarian state after the socialist revolution. It could not apply to a non-socialistic state which could only be abolished by a revolution and not by peaceful evolutionary methods. So, Lenin regarded proletariat revolution in a very organized and revolutionary way. He explained that no movement can be durable without a stable organization of leaders to maintain continuity. He further explained that organization must consist chiefly of persons engaged in revolutionary activities, as I have earlier explained you, as professional revolutionaries. So, revolution and its objectives can be attained through trained professional revolutionaries. Now I briefly explain you about Lenin's views about dictatorship of proletariat. Marx and Engels highlighted the dictatorship of proletariat meant the establishment of a truly democratic state with the workers' majority ruling over the bourgeois minority. But according to Lenin, the dictatorship of proletarian meant the dictatorship over the proletariat of the crushing capitalism. Very important point. Crushing capitalism, establishing socialism, and maintaining it. Lenin believed that the dictatorship of the Communist Party over the proletariat was true democracy because it was a dictatorship in the interest of workers. According to Lenin, dictatorship of the proletariat was the instrument of the proletarian revolution, its organ and its mainstay. The object of this dictatorship is to overthrow capitalism, crush the resistance of the overthrown capitalist, consolidate the proletarian revolution, and complete it to the goal of socialism. A revolution can overthrow the capitalist but cannot consolidate its gain and achieve socialism without the dictatorship of proletarian. So, Leyland says dictatorship of the proletariat is persistent struggle, bloody and bloodless, violent and peaceful, military and economic, educational and administrative, against the forces and traditions of the old society, the capitalist society. If we analyze these views of Lenin, then we find out that Lenin had very clearly explained dictatorship of proletariat class or dictatorship of proletarian class. He further explained that proletarian dictatorship is a rule unrestrained by law and based on the superior force of the proletariat. There is not a complete democracy but democracy of all. It is a democracy for proletarian and a dictatorship against the capitalist. It is proletariat dictatorship, proletariat democracy. It works through Soviets instead of the territorial parliamentary institution. He further explained that it does not mean the end of class struggle, but its continuation in a new form against the still resisting capitalist elements. It is a special form of class alliance between the proletariat and non-proletariat but anti-capitalist elements. During this discussion, I explain very briefly Lenin's views about state. According to Lenin, state plays its very important role for the attainment of basic purposes, and the domination of the majority by the minority leaves little scope for justice or equality in a capitalist state. Lenin was no believer in democracy as such. All bourgeois democracy were, according to him, dictatorship of capitalist over exploited workers. The state represents force, and this force must be opposed by force and overpowered by the worker. Lenin distinguishes clearly between the state and government. Our state must not be confused, identified with our government. Our state is organization of the class of proletarian as a state power, the purpose of which is to crush the resistance of the exploiters, organize socialist economy, put an end to classes. Our government, on the other hand, is peak of the state organization. So, Leyland's views about classless society and withering away of the state are rather utopian. He highlighted importance of proletariat class, and in the constitution of Soviet Union the word state used very clearly. Next most important point of Leyland's philosophy is, and that is major contribution of Leyland's in Marxism about his views, the Communist Party. He highlighted importance of Communist Party, and he organized a Communist Party. According to Lenin, the training of the masses for communism is the work of a small, compact corps consisting of reliable, experienced workers, and the Communist Party, which is originally united with the proletariat. In the beginning, in the lower stage of the communism, the government will be for proletariat, but by the Communist Party, which will organize and lead the proletariat. The Communist Party must be imbued with revolutionary spirit and armed with revolutionary theory. Revolution is an art in which the masses are not adept. Some conclusions about Leland's concept of role of Communist Party we can explain here that Lenin, unlike Marx, believed in the potency of ideas and not so much in the material conditions of production as a cause of revolution. He also believed in the efficacy of force more than Marx did. He further explained that the revolution must always be violent. I earlier explained you and I repeated this point that Lenin very clearly explained that revolution must be violent. Now I conclude this topic about Lenin's views, Lenin's philosophy. I briefly repeat and explain you about Lenin's contribution. The most important contribution of Leninism to Marxism is his views about professional revolutionary, which I have already explained you in detail. Professional revolutionary, and he draws a distinction between organization of workers, which is essentially trade unions in character, and their role cannot be denied. And then next most important his contribution is in Marxism is minority leadership. And next contribution, that Lenin realizes that the communists may not be able to win power by open methods, so he advises to different cells of communist parties, different industrial, political, military, cooperative, educational and athletic associations by secret and depending circumstances. He also contribute a centralized supervision, guidance and control in communist cells. Next, Lenin also differed from Marx in his conception of dictatorship of proletariat. To Lenin, this is meant the dictatorship of the Communist Party over the proletariat. So, the concept of Communist Party is another major contribution of Lenin. So, Lenin was not much concerned with the precision of his ideas and theories. He also did not care much to follow exactly what Marx and Engels has stated. His main objective was to guide the Bolshevik revolution with firmness and insight. His enormous power lay in his capacity of organizing a revolutionary party in Russia. So, Lenin always remained a popular revolutionary leader, a statesman, and an administrator, and he became successful leader for communist revolution in Russia in 1917. So that is the end of our today's discussion. Allah Hafiz.